licensed attorney and the process for becoming a licensed nurse, I also started my nursing career in a different state. So I started my nursing career in Texas. So when I relocated to Pennsylvania, I had to undergo the process of having my Texas nursing license be validated here in the Commonwealth. And here's what I will say, all of this is really critical. These pieces of the puzzle are really important and critical for maintaining the integrity of the profession, especially when we talk about things like daycare center licensure or nursing licensure. We want to maintain the safety of the people that are using those services, or that may not even have a choice, right? You may have a trauma and end up in the hospital, and whoever is your nurse is your nurse. And so we really have to make sure that at the same time we're weighing public good and public safety, that we're also taking into account the necessary steps to make sure that those people who have experienced hardships in their past that may have resulted in incarceration aren't prohibited then from re-entering society and becoming really wonderful community members and people who are contributing members to our society and to our Commonwealth. So when we talk about those barriers, when we talk about what it means to bring a nursing license from one state to another state, we have entertained really important legislation this session about entering the nurse licensure compact, which would allow a nurse who is a member of a compact state to practice with his or her license in another compact state without having to undergo the relicensure process, which is a lot of like words just to say, if you're licensed, right? And then the other thing that we've really delved into is talking about what it means to overcome those barriers. There has been an incredible amount of discussion recently around criminal justice reform and what it really means to make sure that when someone has been convicted of a crime and paid their debt to society, that we are making sure that their re-entry into our communities is unfettered and it is without barrier, because what we want is for people to absolutely succeed. So what we have learned is that there's data that indicates that reducing those occupational licensing burdens, and specifically those restrictions that we talked about with criminal records in SB637, it helps regular citizens to regain their footing in society. It helps them to attain positions of gainful employment. It lowers their likelihood that they're going to get caught back up in the criminal justice system again. So it's a really sort of common sense approach to professional licensure here in our Commonwealth. And there have been a lot of, like I said, unanimous votes through the Senate, through the House. It's now at the governor's desk. We're very excited about that. And having been in the legislature for almost 2 years, I could tell you how rare it is that we have unanimous, bicameral, bipartisan support on anything. So I think that really speaks to the underlying desire that legislators have to remove barriers and to make sure that people are able to regain their footing, re-enter as gainful employed citizens in our economy, and help to contribute in uplifting our Commonwealth. That's really what it's all about. So as we recognize these barriers, you know, you and I have been having a very robust conversation about these things, and I have to tell you what is red tape to some is really completely prohibitive to others. And so we've got to be mindful of that within our larger system and reform efforts that we're undertaking here. I can tell you that when I relocated from Texas to Pennsylvania, I had a newborn and was navigating being the parent to a newborn and trying to figure out the licensing process. And I still didn't encounter the barriers that many of our neighbors who have these criminal convictions are encountering. And so if I found it difficult to navigate with resources that were available to me, I can only imagine how daunting and how overwhelming it might appear to somebody who says, you know, why bother? I'm not even going to be able to get through the licensure process when I'm finished. I'll just share a quick anecdote, although it's not about the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but I read recently a very interesting article about a woman who was elected to the legislature, and I'm going to get the state wrong, I just know it, but she was elected to the legislature. She was a nurse, and she had some convictions from drug use, drug misuse, substance misuse, and so she had spent time in jail. And after she came out of jail, she went to law school, got her law degree, and then had to petition the courts in her state so that she could practice as an attorney despite her criminal conviction. So she won that battle. She is now a state legislator trying to enact the same kinds of measures that we're looking at here in Pennsylvania to remove barriers, to make sure that when we talk to people about rehabilitation and we talk to people about second chances, we really mean it, that we're not just paying lip service to it.
And, you know, I'm really happy that the Commonwealth, just being my home state, I feel like I say this often, I'm really proud of the progress that we've made and the sensible progress that we've made. But when I talk to any legislator in the Commonwealth about occupational licensing and specifically about SB637, what I hear is exactly what you're giving me, which is empathy for certain people's situations. Just having certain awareness as to other people's difficulties and then acting on them, I think is really admirable. And like, that's the thing as a constituent that we're looking for from our leaders, is to, you know, recognize, acknowledge, and then act. Like, that's what we're looking for. So I'm really happy that you're part of that leadership team to not just recognize and not to address and not to just promote, but to act on it and to help those with criminal records who have served their time recontribute to society and to our economy and, you know, to their livelihoods.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's really interesting, I think, is that when we talk about professions, for example, nursing, right? And we're talking about licensure as a relatively new phenomenon when we talk about professions. One of the things that the conversations we have around nursing is about elevating the profession, making sure that people who are entering the profession are entering it with integrity, are entering it with a sense of service to the patients and to the medical profession. And so we can elevate the profession and at the same time make sure it's an accessible profession for people. And so that's what I really think this bill gets at. It really does make, it makes clear that we want people who want to work. We want them in our Commonwealth, and we're going to do what it takes to make sure that if we can remove barriers, they're removed, and give them at least the opportunity to achieve you know, as much as they want to. So I think it's really important that we talk about the history of professional licensure, especially, and having experienced it in two different states for the same profession and then two different careers in the same state, it's really very interesting to understand the nuances of all of those different hoops that you jump through. And really how, like we said before, some of those hoops may seem insurmountable to people that have certain barriers from their past that make it really difficult to navigate. So we can do better. Let's do better. And that's what SB 637 really does.
I completely agree. And I apologize. We had a few technical difficulties earlier. So if you could just give me a little spiel on what the bill was, and then we'll move on to the next line of questioning here. But if you could just maybe give a quick little recap on SB 637 once more.
Absolutely. Senate Bill 637 means that convicted Pennsylvanians who seek professional licensure here in the Commonwealth, professional licensure boards are no longer going to be able to use criminal history to deny someone a license unless that crime was directly related to the occupation in which they're seeking a license. So the Department of State and licensing boards are going to help us to develop guides to help Pennsylvanians with convictions navigate the licensing process and make professional licensure here in our Commonwealth and professional practice much more accessible.
That's really great. And I know that this bill touches on a couple different things, but primarily I see the theme being the criminal justice reform piece of it, which I personally find as one of the more important and intriguing things in our country that needs reform as a whole. But I will ask, you know, some people, some legislators, some policymakers, some researchers think that the right to earn a living is sort of the baseline for occupational licensing reform, or, you know, criminal justice reform might be the baseline for it. What are your thoughts on that? And, you know, what do you think we should do next?
So I think you're right, and I think that right to earn a living is a baseline for that occupational licensing reform. I think one of the things that you and I have been speaking about is operating from a place of compassion and trying to see how barriers really do impact people. So I think we all sort of fundamentally in America, we talk about this, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you make yourself, you know, make good, right? Like you're gonna grow up, you're gonna go to school or learn a trade, and you're gonna make good, and you're gonna be a good, productive member of your community. And that path isn't always, you know, as linear as it is for some people. So in the event that it's not, in the event that people do have derailments and they have problems sort of figuring out what it is that they want to do and how to make sure that addiction issues or other you know, criminal issues don't impact their ability to earn a living, then they find their footing. And what we need to do is make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that footing is on stable ground. It does us no good to incarcerate people for crimes and then have them serve the time that they've been sentenced to and re-enter the community without an ability to re-enter as functional, thriving members. And those are the, I mean, to me, that's sort of the baseline, right? That everybody really should be entitled to earn a living and to live the best quality of life that he or she is willing to put forth the effort to live. That being said, it's not enough to just say, work hard and you'll get there. We've got to make sure that barriers are removed, that there's equity, and that the playing field is really evened. And so when we talk about somebody repaying a debt to society through incarceration and then coming out back to their community, what is it that we can do to make sure that we're not seeing someone revisit criminal activity because they feel they don't have other options? Not to mention that if we are using our criminal justice institutions as places of reform, hopefully people are getting the opportunity to learn and maybe study a trade. These are things that could be next steps when we talk about, like, well, okay, what's the next step here? Maybe we can have barber college in the jail so that when people get out, you know, they're able to go ahead and apply for that barber's license because they have the hours of practice.
Absolutely. I think that was really, really well put. That's something I kind of say regularly, but yours was so much more eloquently put. So thank you for that. You know, I always say that for us to have to trust into our criminal justice system. So, I mean, admittedly, there's obvious missteps that happen within our criminal justice system. We're all human, right? So if we are to trust in the criminal justice system, that means that we trust in the parole boards that are put together and set forth by the states. And so if somebody is granted parole or their sentencing is up, then that directly means that they have paid their debt to society. And it's time for us to help them re-enter and have purpose and just contribute and, you know, treat them like the human beings that they are. So I think that was just really eloquently put, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate you really touching on that issue of, hey, they did serve their time, so let's help remove barriers so that they don't contribute to recidivism rates. And I will go on on that topic. What do you think that what direction do you think the Commonwealth should move into next, whether it is with occupational licensing or criminal justice reform?
So the good news is that we have, we've been looking at reforms in both of those areas, in occupational licensure and in criminal justice. So we've got, you know, all cylinders firing here. Just first to talk a little bit about professional licensure, we've got several bills that are on the horizon that we've talked about that would allow professionals to practice to the fullest extent of their licenses. So if you have someone who's a certified registered nurse anesthetist, if you have an optometrist, if you have certain types of physical therapy or a registered dietitian or nutritionist, The reason that that's important is because we want to attract professionals to our Commonwealth. We want to make sure that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has a really robust, dynamic, high-earning workforce so that we have really wonderful resources in community. And so that the people that are living here are invested in their communities. That's really something that's critical and important. When you say, okay, go to school, incur this debt, learn these things, take this exam, but I'm only going to let you practice to not 10/10 of your license, 9/10 of it. I'm going to hold back that 1/10. Then we're creating another barrier. We're making the Commonwealth less attractive as a place for professionals to come and practice. So what we need to do is make sure that everyone's able to practice to the full extent of their license. We've entertained a lot of legislation this year surrounding that and passed most of it. We're still working a little bit on some of the nursing language, but we're getting there. And again, this is not to jeopardize anyone who is seeking these services or being treated by these providers. It's part of their training, and it's part of the test taking that they have to undergo in order to be licensed. It's just really a matter of making sure that they're practicing to the full extent of their license. Part of that means that when we have rural areas that are lacking in opportunity for healthcare providers, that can expand. Suddenly, we have more providers that are able to provide care in those rural communities because they're practicing to a higher level and because they're being reimbursed by insurance at higher levels. This is critically important. It's hard to work in a place where you don't get paid. So let's make sure that we remove the barriers to licensure and practice under your license so that you can be reimbursed through Medicaid or Medicare or your private insurers. And then people are able to provide the kinds of services that are needed in these areas where there might be a medical provider desert. So we've got to think of the implications of all of this and how it all goes hand in hand. So that's one of the things. And then switching, of course, to criminal justice reform, which is another topic that we have so much work to do on. I will say I'm very proud that we were able to pass a group of bills out of the Senate. It has gone on to the House. It's awaiting a vote in the House. But in the Senate, we were able to pass some really wonderful legislation around probation and parole reform. And part of this is some of those, I'm going to get the terminology wrong, and I apologize. It's when you have a technical violation and you're not recommitting or committing another crime, but you have a small technical violation that can add time back onto your sentence. These are just more ways that people are being sort of continually punished for something that, doesn't really have to do with the initial crime. And the outcome of that is that it's taking even longer for those members of our community to re-enter and be good, productive members of our communities because they have all of these technical violations that they're still working through the system on. So that's one of them. Another one is with regard to police reforms, and it's with regard to banning chokeholds. We all, over the summer, in the many months that have followed, have really seen incredible community involvement and community unrest surrounding issues of police brutality and police violence. And so it is really so critical and so important that we were able to take a look at least at this one little piece of it and say there's something the legislature can do here. There's something we can do Commonwealth-wide so that we're not using a type of hold that most of our police departments, when we talked to them, said that's not something we do anyway. It's not even part of our protocol. So let's make it law. Let's write it down. Let's not just leave it to chance. Let's not just leave it to, I hope that we're not doing that, right? We've got to make sure that people understand that our public safety officers are here to protect and serve all of us. And it's really got to be the kind of thing that we're putting down into law so that there is no nuance, there is no question, there is no ability to, sort of argue the nuance of it. We've got to be clear. We've got to be clear. This is acceptable. This is unacceptable. This is one of those things. And banning chokeholds is something that we're very happy we were able to do. I will say, to be incredibly frank, there is so much more that needs to be done. And these are just the basic stepping stones here. But I am very hopeful because the discussions are occurring, the conversations are happening. I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee, and we're having hearings where we're talking with all different sides. We're talking to people who are members of policymaking groups who say, hey, in the airline industry and in the medical industry, we have what's called a sentinel event, and then we have a review process where we look back on the terrible incident and say, what went wrong here? Was it a systemic breakdown or was it isolated? And if it was systemic, what can we put in place to prevent a systemic breakdown from occurring in the future? These are things that we're talking to policymakers about. We're talking to the FOP, we're talking to our police officers and their unions about, well, what is it going to take for us to work together toward a resolution where your officers feel safe responding to a call, but our community members feel safe with you responding to a call, So that's really hand in hand. And so we've got to make sure that we're codifying these things. It's not enough to have a conversation and say, whew, I'm glad we cleared that up. Let's codify it. Let's make it law. Let's make it really crystal clear so that people understand equity and they understand where they stand with our law enforcement officers, and that our law enforcement officers also understand where they are with our community. Part of that, I hate to just keep going on, but I will. Part of that is talking more about mental health and understanding the barriers when we have an issue of mental health, and we're calling on our public safety officers to respond to that. We just had a terrible incident in Philadelphia just a couple of days ago with a young man who I don't know anyone would disagree would have been better served with mental health professionals intervening. It's beyond unfortunate that we've lost another young man and someone who we may have been able to de-escalate a situation if people with a different level of training had been called upon to respond. So all of these are pieces that have to fit together. Community policing, working with our public safety officers, mental health reforms and mental health parity. All of that has to go hand in hand. And what does this have to do with professional licensure? Well, everything, because it really does matter what kind of professionals we are attracting to our Commonwealth and what we're doing to make sure that our communities are strong and they're supportive and that they are catching their community members when they see somebody falter. That's really a critical first step. It really does take a village. And we have the power to do it and we have the compassion to do it. So let's do it. Pennsylvania is ready. Let's do it.
I couldn't agree with you more. That was beautifully put. And I was just going to go back and say, and just to prove that and to see that the legislature is working hand in hand with the Fraternal Order of Police. Last time I was able to visit the Capitol, which was obviously a while ago now, from my understanding with this filtration system almost with SB637, the state police kind of are helping out with it, or they did at least help out with it, and saying with the different background checks and the different criminal convictions and how they may or may not be part of obtaining this licensure. So I'm going to say kudos to the legislature for really already developing that relationship with the police and the community all at the same time, because I wholeheartedly agree that that's how we move forward, is always together. That's how we move forward.
Well, I appreciate that. We rarely get kudos. And I have to say it's not, really almost rightfully, the legislature has a very difficult time moving beyond gridlock and getting good things done for the people of the Commonwealth. So I will accept those kudos because I think it is one circumstance where we really have broadened our thinking and really deepened our compassion. And that's it's got to start from that place. It's got to start from us remembering everyone is someone's child, brother, father, sister, cousin, aunt. Every single person is a loved one to someone else. And when I was a nurse, I used to always think, how would I want my loved one treated if he or she were the one in this room? And so that's why it's always been the way that I've approached things, especially here in our legislature. How do I want the loved ones that I have in my family? How would I feel if they were community members and being treated by these larger organizations as a whole? What would I want their outcomes to be? And we in the legislature have a lot of room for improvement on those conversations and those outcomes. So I will gladly accept those kudos for a job well done. We have many more jobs to be done, but I will take the kudos for that one.
Oh, absolutely, you should. And please do not let that kudos say that we should stop. We are just getting started, but it's the collaboration that I give kudos to. I worked within the legislature in a past life, as I say, in both the Senate and the House, different chambers. And there was always this cohesiveness that the Commonwealth eventually came to when it came to sympathy and empathy. I saw this, and I'll kind of wrap it up a little bit after this because you've really been fantastic. And I can't even say much more because you've honestly said it all in the best way possible. But I saw this little meme this morning that I thought really is indicative of what this bill does. And, you know, and it was, you don't have to experience the pain to want to change it, right? Like you don't have to experience the difficulty to want to change it for other people. And that's exactly what you and the rest of our legislature did with Senate Bill 637. I do thank you so much. I hope that you keep fighting this good fight. I'll bet it will be hard, but it'll definitely be worth it, coming from somebody who is in the occupational licensing field as well as in a few other minority fields. Thank you, and keep pushing for us. And I'll leave with, how can constituents or other interested parties get in touch with you or stay up to date with any current updates or events that you have going on?
Sure, they can always visit my website at senatorcollett.com, and they can email me directly at senatorcollett@pasenate.com. We are obviously working remotely, as is everyone, because of the pandemic, but we are getting back to people as quickly as possible to let them know about any events that I'm participating in. And we have another session day coming up, believe it or not, on November 10th. So anyone who's watching who wants to see what the Senate and the legislature are up to, tune in, especially after the election. Who knows what we'll be seeing on November 10th, but tune in, pay attention to what's going on at the State House, and contact your legislators. If I'm not your senator, find out who is and email her or him and let them know what's important to you. Let them know that these are issues that cannot sit on a back burner. Thank you so much for having me, Alana. It's really been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I look forward to many others, and we do have a long fight ahead of us, but you know what? Hard work never scared me away, so I'm ready for it.
I'm glad to have you on Team Commonwealth, and thank you so much again. Honestly, we could probably go on for another hour and we'll talk more offline, and hopefully we'll meet up again and do another one of these again in the near future. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.